Carlos Correa, the question has been, is he going to get the most money or is it going to be Seager? It's going to be very interesting to see. Houston certainly still interested. They weren't anywhere near it with their $160 million offer. I think the big question there could be, could the Dodgers do it? If they don't do Freeman, I thought they would only go for Seager. If they didn't get Seager, they have Turner there. But, with Seager not there now, so much extra money that they're not spending, you can't rule out the Dodgers for Correa. So those would be my two thoughts for Correa right now. Would be Houston or the Dodgers.
That was a dying Jon Heyman, MLB Insider, on his podcast talking about the Carlos Correa market.
Is the lockout going to get him? Is he okay?
Was he crying or was he dying? There's a big difference.
I do like.
There is.
Now I like to imagine that he had just been crying about something, and then they asked him about Correa.
I'm actually worried about John's health. I see a king of Twitch just wrote in on Twitch. Is this guy crying? He's either crying or dying. You could weigh it. 713-780-3776. Was Jon Heyman crying on his podcast or dying when discussing the market for Carlos Correa?
There's no third option here. I think he was just talking into a crappy laptop microphone.
Yeah, maybe.
Dying or crying?
That's got a better ring to it right there for sure.
Dying or crying? Which one was Heyman doing? There you go.
Let me just say this. The idea there's only two teams in on Correa right now is nonsense. Yes, the Dodgers will be on him because they don't have a shortstop right now, but they do have Trey Turner, as he notes. The Astros obviously are still in on Correa until he signs somewhere else. Mm-hmm. But he didn't mention the Yankees. He didn't mention Detroit. He didn't mention the Nationals. He didn't mention the Phillies. He didn't mention the Mariners. That's 5 teams I just named. He didn't mention any of those teams. Ken Rosenthal last week wrote a story in The Athletic and mentioned all those teams, and Ken's as plugged in as anyone.
The Phillies are interesting because, they have the Bryce Harper commitment, and maybe making another double-digit year commitment would be a curious decision by them, but it does feel like it's sort of time for the Phillies to kind of get something going, take that next step. They just had Harper play phenomenally. He won the NL MVP.
Yeah.
And they have some other big-ticket items on that roster at catcher. They've spent some money on some pitchers, but you had Correa to the conversation, and they could be – look, they're sitting there in that division. They're watching the Braves win the World Series. Mm-hmm. They're watching everybody fall in love with the Mets offseason that they've had. And the Phillies are sitting here like, okay, I guess we're just going to run this crew back. Let's go.
Well, they also just watched the Nationals win a World Series a couple of years ago. Sorry to bring back bad memories, but they've seen 2 teams in their division win World Series, and they're seeing the Mets with their new owner, Steve Cohen, spin like it's got a hole in his pocket. So, Phillies are an interesting team, but you're right, Jake. There are way more than 2 teams involved with Carlos Correa. Obviously, nothing can happen right now because we're still in this lockout, but, man, absolutely more teams want this guy. The shortstop market hasn't changed that much since the start of the offseason. Since the Rangers took 2 of the guys, well, you can't eliminate 2 teams. Like, you can eliminate the Rangers and maybe the Tigers, but hell, the Tigers could pull the Rangers and try to get 2 of those high-profile shortstop free agents. So it really, to me, feels like there's only one team that we thought could be in play for these shortstops that you can fully eliminate from the Correa sweepstakes, and that's the Texas Rangers. So it seems like everybody else should still be involved.
Josh from Seabrook, great listener to the show, just texted in. It sounded like he was gasping for air. Why don't we hear more from Jon Heyman?
Oh, no.
Jon Heyman on his podcast also talked about the teams that might be in on the other top shortstop that is still available, Trevor Story.
Story, I have heard 3 teams, Seattle, Houston, and Boston. And I have heard there is a mystery team, which I have not confirmed with Story as well. And I'm sure there are others. But, we know Colorado was interested in Story and bringing him back. From what I understand, I don't think, and I'm getting this second in, I don't think Story will go back to Colorado at this point. I think that's probably a long shot that he goes back, but they have been in on it. Seattle certainly made an offer, and that's a possibility.
So Jon Heyman...
Definitely dying.
No, I was going to say he sounded at the beginning there like he was crying more. The first cut, I thought dying. That last cut, I thought more crying.
I didn't tell you guys this. I've been making out with Jon Heyman a lot over the last week, so I think he has what I've had. You know how my voice has been terrible over the last week and a half's worth of shows?
Oh, just the last week and a half, huh?
Well, terribler than normaler.
There you go.
That's good English there, too.
Day One Donna just made the same reference that you talked about, BK, on Twitch. Maybe he's had a sinus infection like BK recently suffered.
She saw us hanging out. We were at Tiny Boxwoods.
BK sounded sickly for a few days, too.
Yeah.
Thanks to Donna for listening.
Interesting. Yeah, it's a cry-die combo for Jon Heyman there, but these teams are also interesting, too, for Trevor Story. I think you can eliminate Colorado from the conversation. Would they like Story back? Yeah, he's been a great player for them, and everybody knows that his numbers have been better at Coors Field than any other ballpark in the majors, so they would like to have that guy back, but it feels like the Rockies are nearing more of a rebuild, right? They got rid of Arenado a couple of years ago. Just feels like there's no point in bringing back Trevor Story to a 5 or 6 year deal because I don't know if the Rockies are going to be that competitive in the next few seasons. But the Astros, obviously, we've talked about that a lot. That makes a ton of sense. Do I want Correa over Story? Of course. But, like, would I be happy if they ended up with Story this offseason? Absolutely. You would love to get him. And the other two teams that Heyman mentioned there, Cody, are two teams that you're competing with in the American League, right? You just saw the Red Sox in the ALCS. It feels like they're not going to go away anytime soon. And the Mariners were the second best team in the West. They won 90 games this year, and they've got a young core that they feel like they can build around too. So, yeah, not only would you help your team if you got Trevor Story, but you'd prevent one of your competitors in the American League from getting better.
The position flexibility that Story seems to be open to is a fascinating aspect of his pursuit. Seattle's committed to Crawford at shortstop, so maybe Story has to play third base there. He seems willing to do that. Boston's good at shortstop, good at third base, but Story's apparently been willing to play center field.
And Bogarts has an opt-out after next season.
So maybe a season of center field and then switch on back to shortstop. Mm-hmm. Here's what I can't get past on Trevor Story, and it's not the home road splits because I'm not gonna worry too much about that. If this guy's really good, there was nobody wanted him at the trade deadline. Like nobody could make an offer to the Rockies to pry him away for that half a season and give them something better than what the Rockies are going to get when he signs somewhere else, which is a draft pick, like one draft pick. Like there wasn't any team willing to give like a couple of players that would be better than a draft pick for the Rockies. Like, no one was interested in this guy in the middle of this past season.
If you've seen how the Rockies have been run, I think it's more of their problem than other teams.
Like Story probably would have been thrilled to go somewhere else.
Yeah, this team paid Nolan Arenado a huge contract and then traded him a year later.
Yeah.
Like, they are poorly run there. And so I think they have a new GM now as well. So I think that's what happened there. I do want to say real quick, the Heyman podcast, I just want to give him proper credit. It's called the MLB Insider Who Sounds Like He's Dying. No, I'm just kidding. It's actually...
I thought it was called Dying and Crying with Jon Heyman.
That's actually a great name for a podcast.
His name should be Heyman for that one. Dying and Crying with Jon Heyman. It just rhymes.
It's called the Big Time Baseball Podcast. I want to give our guy Jon Heyman credit. And I also want to read this text from 936. Heyman sounds like Uncle Ben in Spider-Man giving his dying words. With great power comes great responsibility, comes Trevor Story. Maybe to Boston and Houston as well.
That's funny. It's a good podcast, by the way. He's on it with Tony Gwynn Jr. So you've got the guy who played in the bigs and the guy who knows his stuff as well. I just did a quick Google search on Trevor Story trade deadline. That's literally what I searched to kind of try to scope out what the situation was in Denver. Right after the deadline passed and he wasn't moved, he gave a quote to the Denver Post. He said, "I'm confused, and I don't have really anything good to say about the situation and how it unfolded."
Wow.
So I think it's probably more of a Rockies thing, to your point, Jake.
That's fair.
And Cody, to your question, I think a lot of people across baseball assumed that he was going to be dealt this past season.
Any chance Story's on the Yankees' radar at all because of the position flexibility?
If you ask me which player are the Yankees more likely to sign, Correa or Story, it's Story without any hesitation.
Really?
Story because you don't have to give a 10-year deal. The Yankees got to pay Aaron Judge. They have Garrett Cole under contract. They have Giancarlo Stanton under contract. Like, how many $300 million contracts are you going to give out? I know it's the Yankees, and they got a ton of money, but Story is not a guy that needs 10 years. You could probably get away with giving him a 5 or 6 year deal. Then he can move to third base, or he can move to second base or move to the outfield because he's so athletic. And I think the Yankees rather go down that path because their two best prospects are both shortstops. So that still opens the door by having one of those guys play.
Well, the position flexibility is big for the Astros then in the long term, too. Mm-hmm. If you feel committed to Jeremy Pena or Pedro Leon in the minor league system for the Astros, Story plays shortstop for a year, maybe throw him into center field when Pena's ready, something of that nature.
I feel like there's a better chance that Story's an Astro than Correa's an Astro next season. mainly considering the length of the contract and what we know Jim Crane to be as an owner.
Yeah.
Like his hesitancy to give out those super long-term deals. I don't think you're getting Correa with that one.